There are moments in military life that define everything. Not the missions you plan for, not the drills you rehearse in your sleep, but the raw, unscripted seconds when everything you are gets put on the table without warning. This was one of those moments. She was standing in the middle of a training compound with 24 Navy SEALs watching her like she was already a punchline to a joke they hadn't finished telling yet. They had brought out Rex, 110 pounds of Belgian Malinois, all muscle and teeth and 4 years of aggression training. And the challenge was simple. Survive. Not defeat the dog. Just survive without running. She was the new girl. She was the first female combat handler assigned to this particular special operations unit. And from the moment she walked through that gate, every single person in that compound had decided she didn't belong there. So they threw her to the dog. Literally. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to find out, was that Rex wasn't just any military working dog. He was her dog. She had trained him. She had raised him from a 12-week-old pup to the lethal, loyal animal now charging across that yard directly toward her. The question that should haunt every one of us is this. How many times have we underestimated someone simply because we refuse to ask the right questions first? Keep watching, because this story is about to change the way you think about strength, belonging, and what it truly means to earn respect. Her name was Staff Sergeant Maya Ortiz, and she had spent the last 11 years of her life working harder than most people could imagine just to stand in rooms where she was never fully welcomed. She was born in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 4 children raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and never once complained about either of them. Her mother's strength was quiet and consistent, the kind that doesn't announce itself but simply holds everything together without asking for recognition. Maya carried that same quality in her bones. She enlisted in the Army at 19, not because she had seen too many recruitment posters, but because she needed structure, purpose, and a way to prove to herself that the discipline she had learned watching her mother survive could translate into something the world would eventually have to acknowledge. Her first assignment brought her to the military working dog program, and from the first day she stepped into the kennel, she knew she had found the thing she was made for. There was a language in how she moved around animals, calm, deliberate, unafraid, and the handlers who trained her noticed it immediately. She didn't just learn the protocols. She understood the dogs. She understood that military working dogs are not weapons in the traditional sense, but rather partners, and that the relationship between a handler and a dog is built on something deeper than command and obedience. It is built on trust earned through consistency, presence, and genuine care. By the time she was 23, she had been certified as a handler and deployed to Afghanistan, where she and her first partner, a German shepherd named Atlas, cleared more than 40 structures in 6 months. She was meticulous, patient, and completely unshaken under pressure. The citations in her file read like someone twice her age had written them. But none of that mattered on the morning she received orders to report to a Joint Special Operations Task Force unit on the East Coast for an inter-service collaboration program that was, in the words of her commanding officer, going to be one of the most challenging professional experiences of her career. He said it as a warning. She heard it as an invitation. What she could not have fully prepared for was the particular brand of resistance she would face, not the kind that comes from rules and regulations, but the informal, cutting kind that lives in sidelong glances and conversations that stop the moment you walk into a room. From her very first briefing at the compound, she felt the temperature drop. The SEALs she was assigned to work alongside were among the best trained warriors in the world, and they knew it. What they had not yet learned was that knowing your own excellence does not automatically give you the wisdom to recognize someone else's. The compound itself was impressive in the way that all serious military installations are, not showy, not designed for comfort, but built entirely around function and purpose. Everything had a reason. Every structure, every schedule, every protocol existed because someone had tested it against reality, and it had survived. Maya respected that immediately. She had always believed in the value of systems built from hard experience rather than theory. And she could see that this place had been shaped by people who had operated in the most unforgiving environments on Earth. What she had not anticipated was how completely her presence would disrupt the unspoken system of belonging that existed among the men already stationed there. The unit was led by Commander Daniel Reese, a decorated officer with 15 years of special operations experience whose default expression appeared to be somewhere between skepticism and controlled impatience. He had not been enthusiastic about the inter-service collaboration program to begin with, and her arrival seemed to confirm his private reservations. He welcomed her with the bare minimum of professional courtesy and then left her to find her own footing, which she did, methodically, without complaint, the way her mother had taught her. The other SEALs fell into different camps. A small number were genuinely curious, willing to observe before forming conclusions. The majority had already formed their conclusions and were simply waiting for evidence to confirm them. And then there was Senior Chief Petty Officer Travis Kowalski, a 12-year veteran who functioned as the informal cultural authority of the unit, the man whose attitude set the tone for everyone else. Kowalski was not cruel in any obvious way. He was simply dismissive, which is often harder to fight than outright hostility because it leaves you with nothing solid to push back against. He spoke to Maya in a tone that suggested she was temporarily tolerated rather than genuinely present. He asked questions about her background in the clipped way people do when they are not actually interested in the answers. And it was Kowalski who, on the third morning of her assignment, came up with the idea that eventually forced the entire compound to reckon with its own assumptions. The K-9 integration demonstration had been scheduled as a routine part of the collaboration program, a chance for the SEALs to observe how military working dogs were deployed in operational settings, and to understand how a handler's role might complement their own missions. Maya had been told she would observe and provide commentary. What she was not told was that Kowalski had quietly arranged for the demonstration to become something else entirely. He had spoken to the kennel master, a cooperative sergeant named Briggs who was eager to impress the senior enlisted leadership. And together they had decided to test the new girl's nerve by putting her alone with Rex during a full aggression exercise without her handler's vest, without a bite sleeve, and without any prior warning. In their minds, this was a reasonable stress test. In reality, it was the kind of decision that reveals more about the people who make it than the person they intend to expose. What neither Kowalski nor Briggs had thought to do, what none of them had thought to do, was pull her personnel file and read it carefully before making that call. The morning of the demonstration arrived with the particular clarity that late autumn brings to the East Coast. Cool air, hard light. The kind of sky that makes everything look sharper and more consequential than it might on an ordinary day. Maya had spent the previous evening reviewing her notes on the unit's operational history and going over the kennel logs she had been given access to as part of her orientation. She had read Rex's file 3 times not because she needed to refresh her memory, but because she found it grounding to see his record written out so formally. To see the professional language applied to a dog she had spent 14 months training from scratch before he had been reassigned through the inter-service loan program 8 months prior. She had not seen Rex in those 8 months. She had thought about him regularly, the way handlers always carry their partners with them even after assignments change. Because the bond formed in that work is not administrative, it is personal in the deepest sense. She had trusted that he would continue to perform at the highest level because she had built that level into him through patience and repetition and love that she would never have described as love in any official report, but that every honest handler knows is the foundation of everything. When she walked out to the training yard that morning and saw Rex in his holding run, she felt something settle inside her chest that had been unsettled since the moment she arrived at this compound. She kept her expression neutral and her pace unhurried because she understood that in this environment every movement she made was being evaluated, and she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her react with either excitement or anxiety. Commander Reese stood with a small group of senior personnel near the observation area. Kowalski was positioned slightly apart, arms crossed, already wearing the expression of a man who has decided how a story ends before it begins. Briggs gave a brief introduction to the demonstration, explaining the exercise parameters with the careful enthusiasm of someone who has been given a role in something they believe will be entertaining. Then he told Maya, with a smile that was just a fraction too wide, that she would be joining Rex in the training enclosure for a live aggression assessment. He handed her no equipment. He offered no protective gear. He said, with that same stretched smile, that they wanted to see how she handled pressure in an uncontrolled environment. Every person in that yard expected one of two things, either panic or bravado. They expected her to flinch or to perform some amateur display of false confidence. What they did not expect was what actually happened, which was that she simply nodded, removed her jacket, folded it with the same deliberate calm she brought to every action, handed it to Briggs without looking at him, and walked directly to the gate of Rex's enclosure. The silence that fell over that yard was the silence of people who sense, without yet being able to articulate why, that something has shifted beneath their feet. Rex came out of that enclosure the way he always did, full speed, full commitment, every muscle engaged, the concentrated force of years of training released in a single explosive charge. He was terrifying in the way that only something truly powerful and truly focused can be terrifying. And the sound of his movement across that packed earth made at least two of the observing seals take an involuntary step backward. Maya stood completely still, not the stillness of paralysis, but the stillness of someone who has already arrived at the outcome and is simply waiting for the physical world to catch up. She did not flinch. She did not raise her arms in a protective gesture. She did not move a single unnecessary muscle. What she did, with a precision that came from over 1,000 hours in training enclosures exactly like this one, was give Rex a command so quiet that the people standing 20 feet away could not hear it. Not a shout, not a dramatic gesture, but a single word spoken in the register she had always used with him, the frequency he had been taught to identify as authority and safety combined. Rex stopped. He did not slow down and then stop. He stopped. 3 feet in front of her, all that momentum arrested in a single instant. And then, before anyone watching could fully process what they had just seen, he sat. And then he looked at her with the focused, patient attention that handlers spend months cultivating in their dogs. The look that says, "I am with you. What do we do next?" Maya crouched down slowly. Let Rex smell her hand the way she always had when returning to him after an absence. And then she did something that nobody in that yard had seen coming. She smiled. Not at the seals. Not for the performance of it. She smiled at Rex, quietly and privately, the way you smile at someone you have genuinely missed. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 10 seconds, which in that context felt like an entire weather system passing through. Then Commander Reese spoke, and for the first time since her arrival, his voice carried something other than controlled impatience. He asked, in a tone that was careful and direct, how long she had worked with that dog. She stood up and told him the full history in a few straightforward sentences. The 14 months of initial training, the bond they had established, the reassignment. And her recognition of Rex the moment she had seen his file in the kennel logs 3 days prior. She had not mentioned it because nobody had asked. That detail, nobody had asked, landed in the compound like a stone dropped into still water. Every ring of consequence spreading outward from a single point of failure, which was not incompetence, but assumption. They had assumed they knew who she was before they ever looked. What followed in the days after that morning was not an immediate transformation, because real institutional change is never immediate. And Maya was too honest about human nature to expect that a single dramatic moment would dissolve years of ingrained attitude. But something had broken open, and what came through the crack was at least the possibility of something more genuine. Commander Reese called a full unit debrief that afternoon. He did not frame it as a disciplinary session, though Kowalski and Briggs both sat through it with the particular rigidity of men waiting to absorb accountability. Reese was measured and precise, the way the best leaders are when they are confronting their own command culture rather than simply correcting individual behavior. He said that the incident had exposed an assumption gap that represented a genuine operational risk, because in real-world missions the cost of that kind of gap is not embarrassment but lives. He said that every person on a team carries information that the mission depends on, and that dismissing a team member before assessing their actual value is not a personality flaw. It is a tactical error. He looked at Maya when he said this, not apologetically, but directly, the way leaders acknowledge when a wrong has occurred without making the acknowledgement performative. She received it the same way, directly, without triumphalism, because she had not come to this unit to win a personal argument. She had come to do a job, and she needed these people to be able to function as a team if that job was going to matter. Over the following 2 weeks, the dynamic in the compound shifted in ways that were incremental but real. Kowalski was the most resistant, as expected, Because people whose authority rests partly on cultural gatekeeping are always the last to revise their position. But even he began to watch her work with Rex with something that moved gradually from reluctant observation toward genuine professional interest. What he saw was a level of tactical precision that he could not dismiss, because Kowalski, whatever his flaws, was a serious warrior. And serious warriors respect operational excellence when they finally allow themselves to see it. Maya ran Rex through 3 joint training exercises with SEAL elements during those 2 weeks. And in each case, the integration of the K9 team into the tactical pattern produced results that were measurably better than the previous approach. She also ran informal knowledge-sharing sessions in the evenings, not assigned, not mandatory, simply offered, where she walked through the science and psychology of military working dog behavior, the decision-making frameworks used in K9 deployment, and the ways that handler intuition is cultivated rather than innate. A significant portion of the unit showed up. Some came because they were genuinely curious. Others came because the calculus of their respect had changed after what they witnessed in that yard. And a few came, she suspected, because the compound culture had shifted just enough that not showing up would now say something about them that they didn't want said. She did not take attendance. She taught the same either way. The final joint field exercise of the collaboration program took place on a cold morning in the 6th week, in a wooded area about 30 miles from the compound that had been configured to simulate a hostile environment with several objectives nested inside a compressed timeline. The exercise was evaluated by external observers from the Joint Command Program and was intended to produce an honest assessment of how the integration had functioned. Maya had been embedded with Reese's lead element, which meant she and Rex were operating at the front of the tactical column, not as a support function, but as a primary asset whose reading of the environment would shape the element's movement decisions in real time. This was a significant departure from the original plan, which had placed her in a secondary advisory role. Reese had made the change without fanfare and without extensive explanation, which Maya understood to be the most genuine expression of confidence available in that environment. In a culture where trust is demonstrated through inclusion rather than declared through words, being moved to the front of the column said everything. Rex performed with the precision and reliability that had always defined his operational profile, identifying threat indicators at distances that consistently exceeded what the human team members were detecting, responding to Maya's directional guidance with the seamless fluency of a genuine partnership, and maintaining composure through simulated stress events that would have destabilized a less rigorously trained animal. The element completed 3 of 4 objectives inside the minimum target time and executed the 4th with a tactical adaptation that the external evaluators noted specifically in their preliminary comments. After the exercise concluded and the debrief process began, the evaluators asked Reese to describe the most significant change in his element's capability over the 6-week program. He was quiet for a moment in the way leaders sometimes are when they are choosing precision over speed. And then he said that the most significant change had been cultural rather than tactical, that the unit had been forced to examine the assumptions it brought to the evaluation of new team members, and that correcting those assumptions had made every other aspect of the team's performance more coherent. He then said something that Maya kept with her long after that compound was behind her. He said that the best operators he had ever worked with all shared one quality that had nothing to do with physical capability or technical skill. And that quality was the willingness to be wrong about what they thought they already knew. Then he looked at her and added, without any visible discomfort, that Staff Sergeant Ortiz had demonstrated what it looked like to possess that quality while everyone around her was still catching up. She thanked him in the way she thanked everyone, briefly, sincerely, and without lingering. And then she went back to Rex, who was waiting for her with his characteristic focused patience, already looking toward whatever came next. Maya Ortiz left that compound at the end of the 6th week with the same 2 bags she had arrived with, and a formal evaluation report that her commanding officer later described as among the strongest he had seen from any inter-service collaboration participant in the program's history. Rex returned to his permanent kennel assignment, and she signed the paperwork with the composure she always brought to the hard parts. Because a handler learns early that the relationship doesn't end when the assignment does. It simply continues in a different form, carried forward in everything the work has made you. What Maya's story teaches us is not simply that a woman proved herself in a hostile environment, though she absolutely did. What it teaches us is something more foundational about the cost of assumption, about how organizations that pride themselves on excellence can still carry blind spots large enough to drive a mission. Of course, and that those blind spots are always most dangerous when they are aimed at people rather than problems. Every team, in every field, contains members who are carrying knowledge and capability that the group has not yet accessed because the group has not yet asked the right questions. The failure to ask is never neutral. It always costs something, sometimes efficiency, sometimes innovation, sometimes the kind of trust that holds a unit together when conditions get genuinely hard. Maya had not come to that compound to change anyone's mind. She had come to do her job, and she did it with the same unhurried, unglamorous discipline she brought to every assignment. The discipline that her mother had taught her not through instruction, but through example. The discipline that had built Rex into the animal he was, and herself into the handler she had become. She had earned her place not in a single dramatic moment in a training yard, though that moment mattered, but in 11 years of doing the work exactly as well as it deserved to be done regardless of who was watching. Her story is a reminder that strength does not always announce itself, and that the people most worth underestimating are the ones who never needed your recognition in the first place. And perhaps the most important question any leader, any team member, any institution can ask is not whether they have the right people around them, but whether they have been paying close enough attention to actually know.